Welcome, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see there are still people joining us. Just like to say good morning to everyone, wherever you're watching from. I hope you're having a wonderful morning. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Climate Center's webinar on the Water Energy Nexus in Driving Equitable Climate Solutions. My name is Destiny Rodriguez. I am the Community Relations Manager for the Climate Center. I work and live in Fresno within the Central Valley. And for our Spanish-speaking attendees, I would like to say that we have a translation feature, which I will explain. If you go and look at the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side, you will see a translation feature, and it will say English or Spanish, and you can click the button of your preferred language so that you may hear the webinar in your language of choice. And we'd love to thank Linguistica Interpreting and Translation for their services today. We have a great group of experts in various fields, and I'm very excited to present them to you. But first, I'd like to explain who we are and what we do here at the Climate Center. So the Climate Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are focused on reducing climate pollution at speed and scale, starting in our home state of California. We are best known for working with local governments around the state to develop community choice aggregation programs. We also work on a statewide Climate Safe California campaign, which calls for the phasing out of water-intensive fossil fuels. We believe in investing in nature-based solutions that help restore soils so that we may sequester carbon and retain more water, and we also must help our frontline communities so that they can become more resilient to climate impacts, such as extreme heat and drought. Our goal is to remove more climate pollution than we admit by 2030. And yes, it's very ambitious, but we need climate action now. The urgency of the climate crisis demands it. Now, I am going to hand it off to my colleague, Davis Harper, who is our San Joaquin County Community Organizer. Davis will provide you an overview of the Water Energy Climate Nexus, which is the focus of today's webinar. Davis?
Thanks for kicking us off, Destiny. Again, I'm Davis Harper, the San Joaquin County Community Organizer for the Climate Center. And just to say a few words before we get started with presenters, we've got significant challenges ahead of us in helping ensure that communities across the state have access to clean and affordable water, and also to make sure that as we're planning for a clean energy future, that it's also water smart and equity driven. And so we're going to be talking about this concept of the water energy climate nexus today, which really refers to the idea that water and energy are vital resources that happen to be interdependent in a lot of ways, and so are both really deeply influenced by climate change impacts, like longer periods of extreme heat and intensive drought, things that we're experiencing right now in California, especially in the Central Valley. And for a quick example of that interdependence, it takes a lot of energy to pump water through aqueducts, to treat it, to heat it in homes, to treat wastewater. On the energy side, we have a huge reliance on hydroelectric generation, with 7 to 15% of our energy coming from hydroelectric sources, depending on how dry or wet of a year it is. So really, climate change creates new challenges for water and energy management, and also exacerbates the impacts of water practices that have historically prioritized the profits of large agricultural producers over the basic needs of families in many cases. We know that lower income households stand to be the most impacted by climate change, really struggle to pay utility bills, which in the Central Valley especially skyrocket in the summer as folks have to use more energy and more water. So really, it's important to identify opportunities to help people be able to save energy, water, and money, and make sure that communities who are being hit the hardest by climate impacts are being invested in a meaningful way, that their health, their economic security are being invested in. And there have been a lot of really great studies showing how water conservation and efficiency can drive down energy demand and its associated greenhouse gas emissions, and along with the benefit of providing more water resilience to communities. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. California started to wake up to some of these challenges, but we really want to emphasize that we can do better to recognize this nexus between water, energy, climate, and equity. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Destiny, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Davis. So as we said before, we have an awesome lineup of speakers today with experience from water management, community choice energy, and more. And we're really excited to get started. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Amanda Monaco. Amanda works for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and she will talk about the impacts of water management and climate change in regards to water accessibility and quality in the Central Valley. Amanda?
Thanks so much, Destiny. I know Davis is pulling up my slides right now, but while that's happening, as Destiny said, my name is Amanda Monaco. My pronouns are she and her. I work for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability as one of our water policy coordinators. And my focus is on management of groundwater resources. Davis, I don't see my slides. I think you might be sharing the wrong screen, maybe. I see a Google Doc. One moment, technical difficulties. No worries, the Zoom webinars. There we go. Thanks so much. This is great. Appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to be speaking mostly about the water side of the water, energy, climate nexus that we're going to be discussing today, with a focus on drinking water issues in disadvantaged, unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley. Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability works with around 30 low-income communities of color throughout California's San Joaquin Valley and the Eastern Coachella Valleys. We work on a whole host of issues with residents related to disinvestment and lack of adequate infrastructure in communities. We work with residents who are embracing their power and really tirelessly advocating for the needs of their communities at the local and state level. And today I'll be talking mostly about their drinking water issues and what folks are doing to address those. Next slide. As some of you may know, but some of you may not, drinking water issues are widespread in the San Joaquin Valley. Around 64,000 people in 64 disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley receive unsafe drinking water. That number excludes folks on domestic wells. We know it's actually much larger than that. During the last drought, the 2012 to 2016 drought, the state received more than 2,500 domestic well failure reports, the majority of which were in the Central Valley. And actually more recent estimates have put that at 3,000 plus wells that went dry in the Central Valley, and many domestic wells have already gone dry in the San Joaquin Valley during this year's drought. Falling groundwater levels are also likely to leave up to 12,000 more wells dry, impacting up to 127,000 people's primary source of water. We know that that's going to happen because of the way that water is planned to be managed for the next 20 years. And drinking water issues disproportionately impact low-income communities and communities of color. Next slide. So given that context, I'm going to be addressing three main things in my talk today. First, disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley, who they are, where they are, what the issues are they experience, community drinking water needs and challenges, and third, how to address community drinking water challenges. Next slide. So first, how do disadvantaged unincorporated communities form? And actually, I should define what are disadvantaged unincorporated communities. Those are communities that are outside of cities. They're not incorporated into cities. And they're disadvantaged, meaning they qualify as low income. In the early 1900s, the agricultural expansion in the San Joaquin Valley brought many families seeking employment. Those families settled in informal communities that became the foundation of what are now disadvantaged, unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley. And despite existing for decades, these communities were not incorporated into nearby cities or given the same essential access to essential services like reliable and safe drinking water, safe transportation, etc. Next slide. Some folks may ask, why do disadvantaged unincorporated communities still persist given these challenges? Housing is much more affordable for folks in disadvantaged unincorporated communities. It's outside of cities, so the cost of housing is much lower. They're located closer to fields, which are many folks' place of work. And there's a common misconception that disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley are full of transient families, that folks just come for a season and leave. That might be the case for a percentage of families in some communities, but on the whole, folks that we work with are part of multi-generational communities. They've been there for generations. Their grandparents came, their parents are there, they have kids, they have grandkids, and they're really invested in making sure that their communities are safe and healthy places for their families to live for the long term. Next slide, please. Some challenges that folks experience in unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley are lack of access to safe, affordable drinking water, which I'll be getting
agua
into
potable,
today.
y vamos a hablar de
Challenges
eso
with
más,
standard
junto con
essential elements of life, substandard housing, lack of green spaces, parks and community gathering spaces, low quality schools, lack of safe transportation infrastructure, poor air quality, and polluting industries nearby. But despite all of that, residents that we work with persist in their advocacy for their communities and are really determined to see their communities be safe and healthy places to live. Next slide. To bring us more into focus on the water issue, I wanted to bring to light the experience of one person with whom I have had the opportunity to work for a while, for a very long time, and I've gotten to know her very well and her story. Her name is Carolina, and she lives in Tombstone Territory, which is a community right south of the city of Sanger in the San Joaquin Valley, kind of southeast of, or directly east rather, from Fresno. Carolina's family lost water in their home in 2016, which is when I started working with them. Their neighbor let them use his hose, and they had to use a large portion of their income on bottled water. After 4 months, they were finally able to get funding to deepen their well. So that gives an example of the suffering that can occur from a family not having access to drinking water. And we can skip the next slide, Davis. So there's essentially 3 community drinking water.
Hay esencialmente tres.
Oops, sorry, I'm hearing Reina. So there's 3 community drinking water challenges. One is water quality issues, second, water supply issues, and third, unaffordable costs. And those really form the triangle of what we need to have safe, clean, reliable, and affordable drinking water. Next slide. Before getting into those 3 issues, just some background. Folks in disadvantaged unincorporated communities use private domestic wells, meaning each home has its own well, or they're on a community water system where they're all connected to a central well and treatment system. Next slide. And they either get their water from surface water or groundwater, so water in canals or water in the aquifers, but the overwhelming majority of unincorporated communities are dependent on groundwater, which is important for something I'll talk about later. Next slide. Water quality issues are the first of the triangle of issues. So first, groundwater and surface water both have contaminants. They're listed on the slide, but some of the most common in groundwater are nitrates, arsenic, 123 TCP from 6. Next slide. And water supply issues are extensive. Both surface water and groundwater have scarcity issues where folks find their wells going dry from dropping groundwater levels, given the history of overpumping in the valley, and climate change, which is exacerbating droughts. Also, surface water is expensive and increasingly unreliable from climate change and variability in precipitation and snowfall. Next slide. Studies show that groundwater specifically, which is, as I said, very important for unincorporated communities, is groundwater is going to be depleted even more over the next 20 years. And a Water Foundation report found, as I mentioned in the beginning, that up to 12,000 more wells will go dry, affecting up to 127,000 people. Next slide. And you can skip this one. The third piece of water issues in disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the valley are unaffordable costs of water. The next few slides have a lot more information that I won't get into, but suffice to say that costs of water are really high for many folks that we work with, because of the ongoing operation and maintenance costs of their wells or of their community water systems. For example, the community of Gantua Creek folks were paying more than $200 for their water bill. And for a home that's very low income, that's an astronomical price. So that's really something that we need to address as well. When folks' wells go dry, if they're on a private domestic well, they have one well for their home, that can cost up to $45,000 to replace. Which for anyone is a large cost, let alone for a low-income family. And then the cost of treating contaminated water is also very expensive. Purchasing bottled water, or getting filters for your home, or having to buy alternate sources of water is very expensive. So next slide. And we can skip that one. Skip. Thanks. Also, there are factors around that also impact affordability that are completely outside of folks' control, such as water use around the community. Next slide. But despite those obstacles, folks are really concentrated on making sure that their communities are healthy and safe places for their families to live and having enough water. And the next few slides I had were more about solutions and how to address these issues. But I'm thinking, since my time is wrapping up, I will end here. And then as we get into discussion, if folks are curious, we can talk more about solutions for community drinking water needs. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much for all the important work that you do and that Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability does here in the Central Valley. We need safe and affordable drinking water for all. So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Our next speaker will be Dr. Robert Wilkinson, professor at Bren School, UC Santa Barbara. He will now give an overview of the water, energy, climate nexus here in California. And I'll give a minute to have Dr. Wilkinson go ahead and start.
Great, thank you, Destiny. Let me just start by thanking Davis and the whole crew at the Climate Center for hosting this event. And if you haven't looked at their website, they have a lot of good material, and I think material from previous events they've hosted that I found extremely useful. So I really appreciate the work that you folks are doing. And it looks like we have over 90 people tuning in on this. And let me thank all of you for taking your time to tune in on this issue. And it's an issue that I've been playing with for decades. So for me, this is kind of what I live and breathe. But for many people, the idea of the energy intensity of water and the link between energy, water, and climate is something that is not something they deal with every day. So I've only got 3 slides, and I'm going to be quite quick because I want to give more time to the other speakers to go through this, and then we'll have some Q&A. But let me just start with the fact that it takes quite a bit of energy to run our water system, and there are emissions associated with that energy. So that's the primary link between the water, energy, and climate situation. What I tell my students to do is pick up a couple of 5-gallon buckets, fill them up with water, and walk up a flight of stairs. That's only 10 gallons, and you'll get a quick sense of how much energy it takes to move water around, especially lift it. In California, about 20% of our electricity goes to the water system in one way or another. That's pumping it out of the ground or out of the delta, moving it, sometimes hundreds of miles through canals and pipes, lifting it over mountains, thousands of feet, then treating it, using it, and then we put a fair bit of energy into treating wastewater and managing it through the end of the system. So if you add all that up, that's about 20% of our electricity, a fair amount of natural gas and diesel fuel as well. So looking for ways to use water more efficiently can make a difference. This first graph just shows how much energy is in different sources of water. The top one, this little dot over on the top right, that's ocean desal. This graph I borrowed from Heather from the Pacific Institute that came out of a report they just released that she's going to talk about. It's quite important to understand the difference. The next one is the State Water Project deliveries, and there's a wide range, as you can see on that. And then Colorado River deliveries, that's water that's moved from one basin to another over distance and over elevation. Then you get down to some of the other sources. Not listed at the very bottom would be water use efficiency, simply not having to use water because we improve efficiency. And from an energy standpoint, from a climate standpoint, that's one of the most powerful tools we have, is simply stopping waste and using water more efficiently. Once you move on to the next slide. So this is urban Southern California. This is basically metropolitan water district service area. And the reason I wanted to show this is kind of a good news story. We can look at a lot of problems related to the challenge of climate change. But in fact, since about 2000 on this graph down to roughly the present, you can see on that orange line, actual demands for water have dropped by over 1 million acre feet a year. That's a very steady trend if you look at that for 20 years, and it's continuing. And that's important. That means it's that much less water that we're moving and all of the energy and emissions associated with it. So that is a very hopeful trend. And that's absolute amount that even though we've had several million more people into that demand base for that area, that's 19 million people or so at this point, even though the population's grown, the water use has dropped. That's mainly because of efficiency and because of utilization of local supply options. The other thing this shows, and this is an important piece of what Heather's addressing in this new report, is that our planning keeps indicating that we're going to need lots more. So all those dotted lines on the top are different plans showing how much we thought we were going to need, but we don't. And so the difference really between those plans and where we are is the good news from a climate standpoint. If you go to the next slide, my last one, this is a plot of the different water supply sources. So you can see again from about 2000 to present that steady decline. The blue bars on the bottom are local water supply options. And as you can see, that has steadily been about half of the water supply in all of urban Southern California. Those local supply sources are very important. That's rainwater harvesting and groundwater systems and so forth. You can see now it's more than half as we get to the right-hand side of that curve, and the imports are dropping. From an energy standpoint and from a climate standpoint, the local supply sources, for the most part, other than ocean desal, tend to be less energy intensive and less emission intensive. This trend is true throughout the state. Lots of curves put up and say, pretty much the same story, that efficiency is improving and local sources are improving. The key here for the climate story is that we do have options. Many of them are short-term. We can help address the drought. We can help address social equity considerations. We've got real opportunities. So that's really the message that I wanted to convey, is that we have a challenge, but we have some good opportunities, and we can get into more discussion of that in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilkinson, for that wonderful overview of the water, energy, climate nexus. Very informational. And also for people that are just joining us, we do have a translation feature on the right-hand side. You can click your preferred language of English or Spanish. And if you do have questions for our presenters, we will have a Q&A at the end. So please use the Q&A feature. With that, I would like to proudly introduce our next speaker, who is Heather Cooley. She is the Director of Research at the Pacific Institute, and she will be presenting a new report that the Pacific Institute has conducted about California's water energy nexus and policy recommendations. Heather?
Thank you, Destiny, and thank you for hosting this wonderful webinar. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk about some of our new work. We're at the top. Davis talked a bit about some of the challenges that the water, energy, climate nexus presents. It also presents us with a number of opportunities, and I hope that's sort of a takeaway that you take from my presentation today. If you could go to the next slide, I'll jump in. So today I want to talk a bit about a comprehensive assessment that we just released, looking at the energy and greenhouse gas footprint of water in California. I'll also describe several case studies that highlight some of the risks, but also some of the opportunities associated with the water-related energy and greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, I'll conclude with some policy recommendations. Next slide, please. In terms of the assessment, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology, and then we'll talk about some of the results. But in doing our assessment, what we did was first estimated the energy intensity of each stage of the water management cycle, and that the graph that Bob Wilkinson showed in his comments really attests to that. What are the energy requirements for each of those steps and for each of the sources? We then calculated the greenhouse gas intensity of each of the energy sources, so of electricity and natural gas. We then combined that with scenarios of both future water supplies and water demand for the urban and agricultural sectors, and then applied all of that to the historical and future water use. And that, I think, is the underlying methodology. And again, I'll talk a little bit about the scenarios in the next slide. Next, please. For our water demand and supply scenarios, we really, to the best of our ability, tried to rely on existing projections of demand. We projected out to the year 2035. Our water supplies were really drawn from water suppliers' plans and from the Department of Water Resources. So we used the sort of existing water supply portfolio for both the urban and agricultural sector. For urban demand, we relied on urban water management plans, which are produced every 5 years. They represent about 90% of the statewide population. And from those, we were able to develop really 3 scenarios. Our high scenario was based around the projections that the urban water suppliers make, what their future demand will be. And as Bob has shown, those tend to overestimate demand. So we use that as our high estimate. We then developed an urban scenario where we kept urban per capita use at current level, as 2015 levels, and simply multiplied by future population. That was our mid-case scenario. And then we did a low scenario where we continued that trend that Bob has shown around the decreasing per capita water use. And that was our low scenario. And again, we included that, we expanded that out to 2035. On the agricultural side, there aren't similar sort of water management plans available for projections. So for that, we really relied on projections developed by the Department of Water Resources. It's in the same time intervals going out to 2035. For that, they only had the Central Valley hydrologic region. So that's about 80% of California's agricultural acreage. So it's not 100%, but it's a significant portion of agriculture. In that, we were dependent in many ways on what the scenarios that DWR had developed. They developed 3 scenarios, one that included a high degree of urban encroachment on agricultural land and therefore took some land out of production. And they also applied some climate impacts on that. So it ended up that there were sort of 3 scenarios, a low, medium, and high, all with varying degrees of urban encroachment and climate change impacts. They did not explicitly evaluate the impacts of sigma, although that's something we explore in a case study. So I want to make that clear. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the results. This figure is showing both projected urban demand, projected electricity and natural gas use, and the water-related greenhouse gas emissions from 2015 to 2035 in each of the 3 scenarios. As you'll recall on the right side, that was the water supplier's projections, ends up being a relatively high water use case. So this was, again, based on the information in the urban water management plans. The water suppliers projected that their total water demand would increase by about 44% between 2015 and 2035. That, of course, would increase their water-related electricity and natural gas use. And this then suggests that despite major efforts to decarbonize the electricity grid, water-related greenhouse gas emissions would increase by 2%. So really, we're just holding steady at current greenhouse gas emissions from water. By contrast, in the low water use case, and that's on the far left there, that maintains a 2% reduction in per capita water use. And in this case, we see total water use decline by 17% despite continued population growth. This then results in a reduction in water-related electricity and natural gas use and suggests that urban efficiency coupled with decarbonization of the grid can reduce water-related greenhouse gas emissions by an overwhelming 41%. So significant opportunities here. Next slide, please. For the 3 agricultural scenarios, agricultural water use is expected to decline from about 2 to 5%, and that's largely due to urban encroachment. Reductions in water use are projected to reduce electricity use, and then that, coupled with decarbonization, reduces agricultural's water-related greenhouse gas emissions by about 62%. So we see significant savings there too. Again, I want to be clear that Sigma implementation was not evaluated. Again, we'll talk about that in the next slide. Next slide, please. So in addition to doing the scenarios, as I mentioned, we also looked at a number of case studies to identify additional opportunities and risks at the water energy climate nexus for California. Los Angeles, for example, has announced goals of reducing reliance on water imported from Northern California and the Colorado River, recycling 100% of their wastewater and investing in stormwater capture. So while they're taking these steps to improve their water resilience, we find that replacing those imported sources with a combination of those local stormwater capture and water reuse can also help them meet their energy reduction and greenhouse gas goals as well. So lots of synergies there. In the second case, we look at renewable energy opportunities at wastewater treatment facilities. There is a tremendous amount of energy embedded in wastewater, and there are opportunities to be capturing that and using it to not only treat wastewater, but also to generate additional energy for the grid. And that's exactly what East Bay MUD has been doing. East Bay Municipal Utilities District is based in Oakland, California. They service a large portion of the population in the East Bay. A number of years ago, they made a strategic pivot from an operator of a wastewater treatment facility to the operator of a resource recovery facility. So their West Oakland plant produces recycled water. It's also generating energy. Nearly a decade ago, it became the first wastewater treatment plant in North America to be a net energy producer. It's avoiding, in so doing that, it's avoiding about $2.5 million in energy costs and generating about $750,000 in revenues by selling excess energy back to the grid. I want to talk a little bit about our agricultural case study. While our results indicate that ag water is not nearly as energy intensive as urban water, over-reliance on groundwater is causing groundwater levels to drop. We looked at some of the minimum thresholds that are defined in San Joaquin Valley groundwater plans under SGMA. Those suggest that groundwater levels could decline by an additional 100 feet below current levels. And that reduction or that decline in groundwater levels increases the amount of energy required to pump that water to the surface. So even if we're taking less water from groundwater in the future, it could still be much more energy and greenhouse gas intensive than it is today. Next slide, please. I just want to briefly touch on what are the key takeaways from the report. First is that water-related energy and greenhouse gas emissions are projected to increase under current or increased per capita water use scenarios. However, urban water efficiency offers the greatest reductions in water-related energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, replacing imported water with local sources can reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Decarbonization of the electricity grid, coupled with greater electrification of end uses, especially water heaters, can also accelerate some of those reductions in energy use and GHG emissions. And finally, the declining groundwater levels could increase agriculture's water-related energy use. Next slide, please. I just want to conclude with a couple of policy recommendations. Happy to talk more about these in Q&A. Key recommendations that follow from this work are the need to expand urban conservation and efficiency, accelerate water heater electrification, to also restore groundwater levels and expand flexible, high efficiency groundwater pumps. Fourth, to provide financial incentives for water suppliers to invest in less energy and greenhouse gas intensive water systems, for example, through the greenhouse gas reduction funds as one key opportunity there. And finally, the need to formalize coordination between water and energy regulatory agencies and utilities to ensure that there are a reliable source of both water and energy for our communities. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you for summarizing the recent report on California's water energy climate nexus and for those great policy recommendations. Next, we will hear from Martha Davies. Martha is a board member at the Community Water Center and will share detail on how water agencies are central to solutions in reducing water-related emissions, as well as the changes needed to drive efficiency and equity in water management. Martha?
Thank you. I see my slides are coming up. That's great. I want to join my colleagues in thanking the Climate Center for its leadership on climate action. There's so many different ways in which you are making a difference for California, and I really appreciate your great work and appreciate being invited to come here. Interestingly enough, I had a power outage when I was trying to prepare my slides, so I had to go over to the local coffee shop and link into their system. And this gentleman that was sitting next to me asked me this question. He said, how do you help people see things differently? And it got me thinking about this slide from Frank Loeb as a way of helping to visualize how much the way in which we manage our water supplies here through water conservation really makes a difference. So this is Frank Loeb's work looking at the energy savings from water conservation in 2015 related to the governor's mandate to save water during the drought, compared with the investor-owned utility efficiency programs that were invested during the same period. And as you can see on the left-hand side, the blue is the water conservation. It exceeds all of the investments made in California by the IOUs. And when you look to the right side, you're looking at a comparison of the cost. On the lower quadrant, you're looking at lower graphic, you're looking at the actual cost in the investment in the various programs. And on the upper side, you're looking at the investment in cost per kilowatt hour. And so as my colleagues here today, this morning, have been emphasizing, the embedded energy in water and the related emissions are really important to California as we try to work towards reducing our carbon emissions. Next slide. So I was asked by Davis. I actually worked for 17 years with the Inland Empire Utilities Agency in Southern California as an assistant general manager, and I got the privilege of leading a lot of their efficient water programs. And so this slide is just to recapture how many different ways water agencies can help to reduce carbon emissions. So Bob and Heather really covered very well, the energy intensity of water supplies. Our number one cost from the water industry perspective is labor, but our number two cost is energy. And so the things that we can do to improve energy efficiency of our pumps and our pipes, but also on the water side, leaks are a really big deal within our system. Some of you may remember some of the big leaks from the city of Los Angeles. A lot of water was spilled. Trying to figure out how to close the loops on these systems so that they're efficient from both an energy and water perspective is a big deal financially to our water industry. Heather just referenced the importance of energy and water switching, source switching as a way of reducing carbon emissions. My agency at the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, we had anaerobic digesters like East Bay Municipal Utility District. We actually brought in addition to the sewage organic material that we were digesting, we brought in cow manure. We brought in local communities' green waste. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which these anaerobic digesters can produce, break down these materials and produce a renewable gas, methane gas, that then can be used as a substitute for more carbon intensive energy sources. But other things our agencies did, and a lot of agencies have done, is energy source switching. We put in solar energy, we put in wind energy, we were using fuel cells, we were using Tesla batteries. There's a lot of different ways in which our water utilities really can contribute to decarbonizing the embedded energy in our water. And then Heather did a great job of covering the water source switching and Bob, from the standpoint of when we move from more energy intensive sources of water, such as imported water supplies, to local water supplies, we can also pick up a great benefit on reducing carbon. But I want to focus most of my talk now on the role of water agencies in helping their customers be more efficient, particularly from the standpoint of outdoor landscaping, I think has been referenced, but most people don't realize the largest crop grown in California are lawns. I mean, there's like 4 million acre feet, that's an estimate from Department of Water Resources, of our drinking water supplies that are actually going into just irrigating lawns and outdoor landscaping. So the whole concept of what does it mean to have more water efficient landscapes? What does it mean to have more water efficient end uses like the toilets and other water efficient appliances in the homes really can make a difference in terms of how we address carbon. Next slide. But it's not enough just to think about this in terms of reducing carbon. We really have to address water equity. And I look for an example of, kind of getting at this concept of what's the difference between equality and equity. And I'm a baseball fan, so of course I picked up on the, what does it mean for all of us watching the San Francisco LA Dodgers game tonight, if you're interested. And the difference between equality and equity, because everybody has an equal access to be able to look at the game, but equity really is about, can everybody access looking at the game? And this applies to the human right to water. We all have a right to water. That's really such a foundational right within our society. But some communities have access to better quality water. That's Amanda's conversation. And many, not just some, can afford to pay more, much more for their water supplies. So for water agencies, we're dealing with rising water costs. They're rising for many reasons we can get into in the question and answer. But for frontline communities, these costs are impacting low income and vulnerable communities the most. And part of a water agency's responsibility is to take a deeper look at these issues of equality and equity and how water is being used in our communities and by whom. Next slide. So I want to take a moment with a kind of a technical slide, but I want to have a core principle that I believe in. The most efficient water users should receive the lowest rates. And let's see, 3 minutes. Okay, so this is an example from Monaco. It's a water budget-based rate example. Just look at the bottom of the slide, and you'll see that they've defined their rate structure from the perspective of what's the most efficient use for indoor and outdoor uses, and then recognizing that inefficient uses have much more costs associated with them. And so the people that are inefficient should pay those costs. Next slide. So 3 key issues in terms of actions that I wanted to just quickly address. One, in low income and vulnerable communities, our frontline communities can't afford to waste water. But that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to be more efficient. And for them, being more efficient is really important in terms of affordability. Older houses tend to have leaks and inefficient plumbing that waste water and money. A lot of agency designs for rebates and their other support programs are designed from the perspective of equality. Everybody should have the same access, but they're not necessarily effectively designed to reach these communities. So local communities should ask their agencies to design and implement more equitable programs, and that means sitting down and talking about what does that mean? How do we make sure that we understand what the obstacles are? Secondarily, it's really important that we support a greater investment in water efficiency programs. I think Davis is going to talk about this at the end of this presentation. Number 2 is typical agency rate structures contribute to water affordability challenges. And it's hard. I mean, within their water agencies, there's a component of water agencies, the non-regulated, that for them, lifeline rates are not allowed. But many agencies do assume that their supply and their operational costs benefit all their customer equally, as was shown in the Molten Gal example. There's a way of re-looking at rate structures from the standpoint of getting the least cost water to the most efficient customers. And so propose that our communities need to support the state water efficiency standards that are being worked on by the State Water Resources Control Board. Next slide, please. And then finally, just residents and businesses can do more to capture what I call free water. It's not completely free, but looking at certainly more efficiency in the outdoor use for outdoor irrigation, looking at opportunities to replace unused lawns with trees. It makes a big difference in climate resiliency for shade, for heat relief, gardens for food security, climate appropriate plants that also provide habitat for birds and wildlife. And even during a drought, rain from rooftops can be saved for later water use. I just attended a meeting up in Mendocino that they had a water shortage, they were trucking water in, and the consultant they were working with looked at their community and they said, you got enough water from rain just this year to supply all your needs if you were using water efficiency, if you were capturing water off your rooftops, if you were using gray water. And gray water systems are legal in California. This is the reuse of the shower, the sink, and the laundry water for outdoor irrigation. So another action I think is really important, particularly in light of this drought, is securing local agency funding to help low-income residents replace their lawns, but increase the green spaces, plant trees, reuse their household water, because that's a source of water that will be less expensive in the long run than simply being dependent on the water that's being supplied by the water agency. Next slide. This is my summary slide of all of the key actions immediately that I think we should be implementing to address the water Climate Equity Nexus. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. Davis?
So thank you so much, Martha. Thank you for explaining the importance of the role that water agencies have in reducing our carbon, or excuse me, in reducing their carbon footprint and ours as well. So with that, I would like to bring a call to action. And Davis, I will let you go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Destiny. Yeah, so following up on all of these wonderful presentations that we're seeing a pretty common theme from, the California Air Resources Board is in the process of updating the state's investment plan for how to spend cap and trade funds. And it's going to be sending recommendations to state legislators in January 2022. We know these funds are meant to be used to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also provide health, economic, and environmental benefits. And so what we're calling on CARB to do now is really invest in agricultural and urban water efficiency as a key climate solution. Again, based on what we've heard from our presenters today, water efficiency can be a major tool for climate mitigation and adaptation and driving equity in that process as well. So I'm going to drop a link to a letter in the chat now that we're hoping y'all can send off to CARB. And back to you, Destiny.
Thank you, Davis, and I hope everyone can support this call to action. We've heard and talked about ways that the water sector can reduce emissions. Now we're going to hand the mic off to Gabe Ruiz with the Central Coast Community Energy, who will be talking about the role of energy providers to reduce water-related emissions as we transition to cleaner, localized energy sources. Take it away, Gabe.
Thank you, Destiny. Appreciate it. And I just want to say I'm very, I'm thrilled and happy to hear so many of the presenters today, talking about the reduction of emissions. That is one of the main goals, as our agency is focused on reducing emissions and providing affordable, clean energy to our customers. So we are a public agency, Central Coast Community Energy, founded in 2018 is when we began service. But I just wanted to touch on, the fact that, we are really focused on providing these incentives to our customers, which we will see here through the slides. Next slide. And then just with the agenda that I have prepared today, going to give you a little update, just kind of explain what a CCA is, a community choice aggregate, community choice energy, and then just an overview of our agency. There are 23 other CCAs in the state of California. So just talking about ours specifically, what is our pathway to 100% clean and renewable energy for all of our customers, and how our energy programs are going to get us there, and the programs that provide those incentives to the customers. And then, of course, we do have a focus as an agency. We serve a very large territory, and it is very diverse as well. So we do have a team that works specifically with our underserved communities and working on improving our outreach to those communities. Next slide. So how does a CCA work? Really what a CCA is, it was a bill that was passed in 2002, which established the CCA's Bill 117. And basically what this did was give communities, cities and counties opportunities to join together to choose where the source of their electricity came from. So it's really giving them more control to say, where are we getting our energy from? How is it being provided, and having a little more, control and transparency, especially when it comes to the rates. So it's very important, we are a community focused agency, but also to understand that, we go out and we source and procure the energy, for our communities, for our service area. But the IOUs, whether it be PG&E, and we are starting to work with Southern California Edison as well, but they still provide the same service. So they still do the billing and meter reading, the transmission, power line maintenance. So that is still all under their purview. What we are doing as an agency is really making sure that we are out there, and where your energy comes from, we are driving that to clean and renewable sources at an affordable price. Next slide. And so just some points. So just as I said, there's about 23 other CCAs in the state. and that deal with, and work with the investor-owned utilities. But right now, that's over 200 cities and counties throughout the state of California are participating as a CCA, community choice aggregate. And we serve over, beginning this year, CCAs as a whole are serving over half of the population of the state of California. So I'm very excited about that. We really see that CCAs are continuing to not only to, improve that transparency, but also the availability to clean energy to all of our customers, and all of the residents across the state. So what it really is helping to meet those climate goals. And just providing with residents and businesses with other options is very important to us. Next slide. So for our agency itself, again, we began in March of 2018 with our first customers, and then again in July with our residential customers. And this was in the Tri-County, the Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Cruz County there. And what we've done in that time is we've been able to expand to totaling 33 cities and counties. Now we're very involved in each one of all of our member agencies, being the 33 cities and counties that we serve. We're very involved in the chambers, with farm bureaus, other industry organizations, and community-based organizations. I'm happy to say, just to relate the conversation in terms of the water agencies and the other utilities, water utilities that are in our service area, all participate with Central Coast Community Energy. And so they've been able to see, the savings that we've provided to our customers since inception in 2018 has been shared with them as well. Next slide. And then there's just some more on the kind of what we've done in our expansion. So right now we do serve, you can see there, over 440,000 customers that will be we are finishing our final enrollment right now, as you can see, in Carpinteria, Goleta, and Southern Santa Barbara County. We are going to be one of the largest CCAs in terms of load. You can see that number there. And really, again, as I said earlier, we have a very diverse and large service area. We are the largest CCA geographically in the state of California. So a lot of that being our focus, being focused on, reaching these communities and giving our attention, especially during these enrollment periods, making sure that they hear from us. I myself work with large commercial customers and make sure that they understand, and we're being very transparent about the process and what's happening. And also we have another team that reaches out to our community-based organizations. So we're making sure that we're touching all aspects of the community during these enrollment periods. Next slide. And just to give an idea, the way, quickly I'll go over this one, but the way that we're governed is your elected officials are the ones that sit on our policy and operations board. So the elected officials from our member agencies, they make up the boards. And then we have a community advisory council. The community advisory council itself is made up of people that work very closely with community-based organizations and with our residents. Next slide. And then one thing I just like to touch on, of course, is that with the choice, local choice we provide for our customers, we have over a 95% enrollment of all eligible customers. We have an A credit rating from the S&P. We were the first agency, the CCA, to do so in the state of California. And we've provided over $50 million in customer savings since inception, $12 million to our energy programs. Next slide. Then with our pathway, getting to 100% clean and renewable, it's pretty clearly stated there. Our goal is to get to 100. All of our customers will receive clean and renewable energy by 2030. So everything that we provide in our service area will come from projects. We have over $1 billion investment into these projects. We have 8 in our current portfolio right now. A lot of these are long-term projects that will be starting to come online this year. We've already had several come online this year, several will be coming on next year, and we're signing new contracts. That is what's going to get us to this 100% goal by 2030, and also, improving the infrastructure in our communities as well. Next slide. Thank you. And it seems I may have just a minute or two left, so I will move quickly through these next slides. But I just want to say with our energy programs, we have $14 million this fiscal year, that is going to be invested into our energy programs. They have electric vehicle programs, ag electrification, which we launched this month. We have our residential and new construction electrification, which also launched this month. We have battery storage projects, summer readiness projects, which is incentivizing large commercial customers to reduce their load during peak event days. Next slide, please. And then with our ag electrification program, so just wanted to touch on this. We have continually invested more and more money into our program. I think that with the total incentives so far, we have had $560,000 for the first 2 years of our program, with a total economic impact of $1.5 million. And then this year's program, we're actually putting over $600,000 into this program. So this is really going towards replacing, the one I would say related to the most of this conversation that a lot of our customers use is replacing old diesel water pumps with new electric pumps. So really what we're looking at is making sure that, you have an access to funds to create these projects to be more affordable for our customers, but they can use it for anything, new tractors, new equipment, switching from fossil fuel to all electric. And then next slide. And I'll finish here on, this has a great relation to what we're doing, but I'll go ahead and stop here. If you, one thing I do want to touch on, just go to slide 14, if you could, Davis. Fortunately, we didn't have time to get to this slide. Next one. Just the outreach that we've done with our communities. So we do farm worker outreach. We work very closely with our underserved communities. We make sure that we're working very closely with stakeholders in these communities. We have an entire committee devoted to improving the outreach to those communities as well. So I appreciate your time. Glad to answer any questions. Thank you, Davis. Thank you, Destiny.
All right, thank you so much, Gabe. So with that, we are going to jump into our Q&A. And I know there's a whole bunch of questions in the chat, and I will start reading those out to you. So the first one is from Dr. Bonnie Hamilton, and this looks like it's for you, Amanda, just hearing about some of the solutions that you spoke about and didn't get a chance to address.
Yes, thank you, Bonnie. Davis, would it be possible to pull up my slides again? There was one of them near towards the end that had a list of ideas. But to start, while Davis is doing that, one big point that I wanted to make in thinking through water solutions, and I'm excited to get into more conversation with all the other speakers about the climate and energy nexus too. But in thinking through really focusing on water solutions for underserved communities, one really big point is ensure you're in tune with community needs, not just by assuming what those needs are from your perspective, but by truly connecting with residents, asking them what from their expertise they know to be what they need. So first, leverage existing community resources and respect community expertise. If you could go to the next slide, Davis. Don't need to get too into it, but essentially residents have a lot of expertise about their needs, what solutions are going to work with them. They have great creative problem solving capacity given complete information, as do we all. So really want to make sure that we're trusting in and respecting community expertise when developing solutions. Next slide. Same point. So next, you can go to the next one. So these are the specific solutions or things that could be added to community expertise to create effective solutions for community drinking water. So things that we find when working with residents in the San Joaquin Valley are that some additional resources they need are research into alternative solutions, assistance with project design and implementation, and help advocating for water management that prioritizes drinking water and protects the human right to water. So those are kind of overall solutions, but really wanted to give some examples of what other organizations or entities could bring to communities to help craft, co-craft solutions to their drinking water needs. So that's what I had to present. And I think we'll probably get more into other solutions and creative thinking more in the conversation. So thanks for asking.
All right, and thanks, Amanda. A question I think that would probably be relevant to Dr. Wilkinson or Heather is from Brandon O'Rourke asking, do water systems or certain parts of our water systems have the ability to utilize load shifting for energy, i.e. using energy when it's cheap? And do systems have the ability to leverage locational marginal energy pricing? Which is there's a new parallel concept of locational marginal emissions that can be unlocked with advanced load shifting. Do you have a response to this?
Oh, well, I can start, and Heather, you can fill in. The water industry already does a lot of timing, so they tend to do pumping as much as they can at night and so forth. That's been a practice, fairly long-standing practice. Could more be done? Yes. There are more opportunities and there are distortions in the system. So, so I think that's an area to keep looking at. One of the points, though, is that when the systems get stressed, they have fewer options. If we're really kind of up against the limits, they're going to be pumping whenever they need to pump, including at times that are that one would prefer to get off of the grid and ease up. So one of the interesting opportunities with combination of source shifting and efficiency is to create more flexibility in the system so that we're able to do more of that sort of thing. I'm not sure on the locational aspect of this. Heather, I don't know if you've got a comment on that.
I don't, but I wondered if Martha might have a comment just in your work with Inland Empire and some of the alternative, some of the changes in timing and sources.
There were so many opportunities to play mix and match on all of these fronts that it actually became hard to evaluate them all. So, on the locational issue, and maybe I'm misinterpreting the question, but I see it through the lens of how do we support the local grid? And so we were recognizing that better information about grid insecurity and the role that water agencies could play to back up the grid in their vicinity could be a really important part of what water agencies could contribute as they figured out how to not only reduce the carbon emissions embedded in their water supplies, but actually could take some of the green energy that they were producing and pushing it out to the grid. And we were playing with that when I left the agency at the time where we were using Tesla batteries as a link to our methane gas generation so that we could time when we were pulling water energy from the grid, trying to be off peak, but pushing green power back into the grid when it really mattered for the local grid resilience. So there's just, the water agencies I chaired the energy committee for Aqua and for the California Association of Sanitation Agencies for a number of years. And it was like being in a candy shop because there were so many different ways that we could approach efficiency, renewable generation, and linking all these things together in terms of creating a much more resilient grid that was climate resilient as well.
It's like Amanda, you have your hand up as well. You want to go ahead?
Yes, I really appreciate the creative thinking about projects to link the grid and projects that Martha was talking about, things that Heather mentioned about the bio waste being turned into energy. I think solutions like that are really critical. And I know there was one question in the Q&A about whether communities are being looped into those conversations. And yes, they are to some extent, but that work could really be amplified. And if all of us on this webinar could help advocate for that to happen, that would be great. I know I'll take the example of a community named Cantua Creek, which is on the west side of Fresno County. They're really innovative, and the lideras in that community are very forward thinking and always want to be doing more. But they are working on getting a new water system in place. The largest cost for that water system was the PG&E bill for the new pumps for 2 new wells to have big pumps to bring up the water. And at the same time as that new proposal was being analyzed by the community and they were thinking of ways to improve it, the community was also part of a California Public Utilities Commission proceeding, which was helping put solar in communities to have community solar projects. And the community was trying to think, okay, could we have a community solar project that would power those pumps and take away that big cost for the water system so that we will have lower water bills, cut out that cost. And it was a really innovative solution. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be able to happen, but we need to kind of, I'm not sure. I think that was kind of a missed connection, that if we could have things like that really combine and work hand in hand, that would be really an effective way to cut down costs for community water as well. Martha, you kind of quirked your head. Do you know else otherwise?
Well, no, I was just surprised because I agree with you that from my analysis of the energy costs for water agencies, typically labor is our #1 cost, but energy is #2, and energy is only going up. So it's hard to believe that where do those paths cross in terms of creating a more cost-effective water supply that's based on based on using solar or other renewable energy sources. And I think that this notion of looking at costs from a community perspective, particularly in the communities where you don't have all of the structure of a water utility, you're really dealing in the unincorporated, and the concept of how we look at community costs and community investments that benefit across the spectrum is really an important next step in how we help the unincorporated areas really come up with cost-effective water supplies.
Heather, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on sort of Amanda's point, because I think it is a really important one, of the idea of bringing people into the process, because, there have been a number of examples where when we bring the community in, that there are solutions that come forward. And I know, Amanda, this is what you're speaking to, that are different, that are innovative. As an example, there are a lot of assumptions about how much water people want to use or will use in the future, or what they're willing to do. But when they're brought in and understand the implications, the water, the energy, the environmental, the cost implications, that all of a sudden perspectives can change pretty quickly. So it is an important piece. There's been examples, for example, in Santa Cruz, where they were considering building a desalination plant, but the community kind of stepped in and recognized that that was a huge environmental impact, cost impact, and instead doubled down on efficiency. So there are lots of opportunities, I think, there. Another key point too to bring in, we talk about energy water nexus and the savings opportunities, but there is a direct connection around affordability as well. By avoiding some of these very expensive new water supply and treatment infrastructure, or downsizing those, there's considerable cost savings there, but there's also energy cost savings. If we're not using and heating as much water in our homes, that can reduce energy bills too. And again, those issues are often thought of as separately, but there are lots of opportunities there to be making our communities more resilient, but also promoting affordability.
Thank you all for those thoughts. I think we're going to end up having to have the rest of the written questions really addressed in the chat, but I'm noticing that our very own Barry Vesser of the Climate Center has a question, and I'm just going to allow you to ask that real quick, Barry.
Oops.
Oh, no, Davis, go ahead and give the last question to someone else.
Oh, okay. So one that I saw that seemed compelling was from Robert Perry of Synergistic Solutions. He mentioned, I'd be interested in hearing the panelists' thoughts on some micro and macro solutions to the water energy nexus. On the micro side, using measures adopted during Australia's drought, installation of large cisterns connected to residential and commercial rooftops for stormwater capture, combined with tiered conservation protocols. On the macro side, covering California's aqueduct system with solar panels. Another macro solution, development of a flood management strategy that directs water to floodplains and injection wells into depleted aquifers. The system could also function as a reservoir and a utility scale pumped hydro energy storage system. So we've got, just in a quick minute or two, if somebody can jump in, then we're gonna have to move on. Bob, do you want to take that?
Shy.
Those are all good. I mean, we take us quite a while to go through that, but you did that. That whole list is the kind of thing that we ought to be doing. It's not clear whether the panels need to go on top of the canals, but clearly a lot of solar photovoltaics is going to go in, so that's a good thing. But yes, there are opportunities. I think the key point that you raised is there are opportunities from the showers to flowers, gray water opportunities, and catching stormwater, rain gardens, and the rest. So small scale multiplied by many really does add up all the way up to large scale activities.
And just to add to that really quickly, in the water conversation, we're always focused on the pipes. We're always focused on where it's coming from somewhere else. And I'm interested in how we make our communities more resilient. So Heather's point, Amanda's point, it really is, how do we take advantage of what is available and make it work for the communities in a much more effective way? That is the lowest cost, it is the most climate resilient, and it is the thing that will most support the frontline communities, which is really important as we deal with this equality, equity question in the water world.
Thank you both. And I wish we had more time. There are a lot of great questions here. If you all can look into the chat and answer with written comments, I'm going to hand it back to Destiny, who is going to introduce our last speaker of the day.
Thank you so much for that, Davis. And thank you everybody for your questions. I wish we had a little bit more time to address them all. They're all wonderful questions, and our panelists will address them in the chat. So I would like to proudly introduce a Central Valley native, Tulare County Supervisor Eddie Valero, who will now offer insights on the impacts of climate change on South Valley communities and the need for solutions to adapt water and energy challenges.
Hello and good morning. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
All right. So first, I want to thank the Climate Center for organizing this event, and I also want to thank the panelists for their insights and trench work throughout the region. So I'll begin by highlighting Tulare County and saying that Tulare County is a county full of possibilities and promise, but it is also a county with persistent poverty and problems. The water energy nexus is clearly evident here, given its topography, production, and power. Despite the challenges we face daily, and know that there are plenty, I assure you that there are local advocates who are working tirelessly with community-based organizations to change the game and change the frame for our underserved and under-resourced communities. Being on the County Board of Supervisors for the past 3 years, I realize that we have more work to do still in reaching equity and equality for the people I represent and all of Tulare County for that matter. As you may know, Tulare County is one of the most crop and dairy producing counties in the entire world. And I would say third to Fresno County and second to Kern County. Yet we couple that amazing attribute with the heart-rending reality of people in poverty. For example, East Orosi has not had clean drinking water for over 15 years. This community has been seen on CNN and CBS News and talked about in United Nations reports. Yet the problem remains. The youth in this community only know that water comes from a bottle and not from their own tap. Persons cannot bathe for an extended period of time because they start to develop rashes if they do so. Even when the community boils its water, it still isn't safe to drink. Unbelievable, right? And I often tell people this community inherited a broken system. They did not create it. Thankfully, after a few years of challenge and change, not by my own doing, but by community involvement, I was able to partner with Community Water Center in pressuring the State Water Board and eagerly pushing its president, Joaquin Esquivel, to mandatorily consolidate East Orosi into Orosi's water system, only located 1 mile away. Back in October of 2018, the state requested a process of voluntary consolidation from Orosi, as it had encouraged OPUD to meet with ECSD, East Orosi CSD. 2 years later, no meeting materialized, and the standstill was growing even more. Thus, action was required, and a vehicle through which a consciousness was motivated by social, economic, and political justice. And now a mandatory consolidation has been in place, and we are beginning to see the fruits of our labor materialize. The county recently approved a system that would allow us to serve an administrator in overseeing the consolidation process. Kudos to community impact. However, if you take the case of progress for our various communities across California, most of it has been done through collective action. So still issues remain across California, and I want to show you a glimpse of what that looks like here in the Valley. And these are slides from the various individuals that have been impacting their respective communities. And these have been prior, I would say about 4 to 5 years ago, when it was very, very severe. So picture one is of Nef Perez, Director of Maintenance and Transportation at Sierra Vista Elementary School in Arvin, California, stands near a newly installed filtered water fountain at an elementary school. The school installed a system to remove water contaminants such as arsenic and is providing refillable water bottles to students. Again, this was happening also in the community of Yereman Seville. However, Yereman Seville now has clean drinking water. Picture two, if you can, next slide, is Jesus Quevedo. And unfortunately, this advocate has passed away since last year, but his message and his vision and his mission continues to this day. Jesus Quevedo stands outside his home in Cutler, an agricultural community in California's Central Valley that has been hit hard by persistent drought. Cutler's backup drinking well was contaminated with DPCP, and many residents like Quevedo still buy filtered water from a vending machine because they still worry about their clean drinking water. Picture three, Belan Ruya makes every drop of water count as she washes dishes in her East Porterville, California home. Like her neighbors, her well ran dry, and now she and her husband Artemio get water from a nearby fire station. Thankfully, the work that the county did with East Porterville allowed East Porterville to now have clean drinking water. Picture four is Vicente Tapia transfers water that will be hauled to his home from the nearby fire station. And then picture five, Guillermina Andrade, a picture that was seen in Leadership Council slides, fills up 208-liter, 55-gallon barrels twice a week from this water depot. The well at their nearby home ran dry for a total of 18 months. And then lastly, and this is a picture that I love seeing, and it's a community coming together and really identifying the issues and making progress in their respective communities. So as I've mentioned earlier, advocates continue to advance causes as a collective and helps individuals like me be accountable to the people that I represent. For example, Seville now has clean drinking water for the first time, and Yedem will soon be connected to a joint system. And the county transferred governance to newly formed community service district last year. Becky Quintana has spent most of her life watching her community of Seville struggle with water quality issues. Now in her early 60s, Quintana remembers seeing her late father, Lalo, show concern about the community's water system. While not much change happened back then, community residents like Quintana began to ask questions. Why are we running out of water? Why does this keep on happening? Although Quintana's father never lived to see the day that Seville would turn on the tap just last year and clean water would flow freely into the towns of 100 homes, Quintana, the daughter, was there when it happened last year, and she was there at the turning on the tap ceremony. Communities like Seville and Yedem represent the hardships we still face as a county. However, it is through commitment, resolve, and collective capacity that enable us to tackle these issues for the betterment of county residents. Phase 2 of the project will cost another $3 million and include similar improvements in Yedem, as well as cost of interconnecting to the two systems separated by about 2 miles long. I also just want to let you know too that I've been a strong advocate for another program that we've completed here in the county, and that is MioCar. It is the first car share program in the San Joaquin Valley, and I have 2 sites located in Orosi and Dinuba, especially helping people get to emergencies, appointments, and their groceries. And then lastly, we're also working with Self-Help Enterprise as being selected as a community energy navigator program manager for the San Joaquin Valley. And so it's programs like these that we're changing the frame and changing the game for communities like those of my own in the county of Tulare. And I just want to say last year, the California Public Utilities Commission also approved $56.4 million for affordable energy pilot projects. And I'm glad that those are happening in District 4, Northern Tulare County. So lastly, I just want to leave you all with a quote. And that quote is that your ultimate goal as a leader should be to work hard enough and strategically enough that you have more than enough to give and share with others. And that is what we are all here doing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Valero. Thank you for giving faces of those who are most impacted. I'm going to hand it off to Nina Turner, our Energy Program Coordinator, who has a very important ask of you all today. Nina?
Hey, everybody. Like Destiny said, my name is Nina Turner. I'm the Energy Programs and Communications Coordinator here for the Climate Center. So earlier in this webinar, Davis had a call to action where we sent a letter to CARB. So I have another quick action for you all to take. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to endorse our Climate Safe California platform. So Climate Safe California is a bold suite of policies to address the climate crisis. It is a unique, urgently needed, and comprehensive campaign that would catalyze similar efforts in other states, the nation, and the world. So far, we have over 1,400 endorsements, and we would love to see your names, your orgs, and your businesses endorse as well. And I know we don't have too much time, but feel free to read about the platform on our website, theclimatecenter.org. And I will pass it to Destiny to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Nina. And I hope everyone on this webinar endorses. It takes a few minutes to make a lasting impact. As we've heard from all of our wonderful presenters today, there are considerable challenges ahead of us around water and energy in California as climate change impacts such extreme heat and drought, and it continues to increase. We learned from Amanda how climate change and water mismanagement has impacted communities in South Valley. We learned from Bob and Heather that water and energy resources are deeply connected, and what happens in one sector has ripple effects on the other. And we heard from Martha that increasing water efficiency is a key solution in reducing water-related emissions. Gabe explained the power of CCAs to drive down water-related emissions as we transition to clean energy. And lastly, we heard from Supervisor Valero and his insight on how these issues are facing constituents and the recognition that we are all in this together. I want to thank all of our presenters and our attendees today for joining, and I hope everyone endorses Climate Safe California and signs on to our CARB letter. Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks to the Climate Center team. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.